So everyone's been coming to the streams and asking, what do I think about the potential nerf to the Grau, or the confirmed nerf that'll be happening to the Grau within the next week or so, when they said they'd have a mid-season update that was going to balance out some of the weapons. First off, I think there's going to be two parts to this. We're going to talk a little bit about what I think the nerf to the Grau will be, and what are some of the other balancing changes I'd like to see, and then what will be the new meta as a result of this. And if you enjoy the content or learn something new, please do me a favor hitting that like button. Go on today's video's 1,200 likes. If you're brand new looking to find your way back for more Call of Duty content, just make sure you subscribe with notifications on, so that'll be as easy as possible. So there's a lot of different factors to take into account when we're actually considering what the new meta will be. First off, we gotta kind of review what the previous meta was before the Grau kind of took over. And if you guys will remember from the earlier seasons, what a lot of people were using was like an M4 with a sniper combination, whether it was the AX or the HDR, that's pretty irrelevant. But people were combining that with the sniper, and then the MP7 kind of came into the mix. And for whatever reason, everyone thought the MP7 got nerfed, even though in fact it did not receive any kind of nerf. And that was the first initial meta. Then everything kind of shifted over to the snake shot meta, which was the dual wielding. For whatever reason, that was completely broken, overpowered, too easy to down complete teams, and you didn't really have a way to retaliate. And that was the meta for quite a while, and I felt like that was probably the most boring meta. It was kind of cool to kind of rush people. You could take on 3 people that you had no business killing, but at the end of the day, it kind of made it imbalanced and really not all that fun after a while, since pretty much everyone ended up doing the exact same thing. And on top of that, it allowed you to pick up a loadout with Ghost in your first loadout, or in the free one that comes, or in the one that comes in the 5th circle, because you were just able to use the pistols as your secondary. And then once those got nerfed, people started jumping on the Renetti bandwagon, and I think after a very short time, those got pretty much nerfed into the ground, so if those were neither of an option. And I think a lot of people thought people would just jump on the RPG meta with maybe an M4, and then a lot of people started transitioning to the Grau. And then near the end of April, I already kind of called it. I said, everyone's going to be using the Grau MP5, and that's kind of the meta we have now. It's not necessarily because of me, I just kind of called what kind of everyone was leaning towards based off of what I was seeing, what the overall results of the weapon is, and how it combined. I just felt like that would be the new meta, and that's kind of what it's been for about a season and a half, which it's kind of gotten a little bit stale, especially if you're in the higher skill bracket. So that's how that part works. Obviously, that meta has gotten a little bit more stale, and we're getting a little bit bored of it. And I really think they should have introduced these balance changes once they introduced Season 4 with the new floor loot, and all those different variables that do change with the zones, with the overall bounties. All that should have changed at the same time when they're introducing new weapons, so we can kind of figure out the new meta for ourselves. But it ended up being no one's using the AMAX, and hardly anyone's using the Fennec or the Vector, just because they're just not good enough to compete on a wide global scale, meaning that the Fennec might be good in duos or solos, but once you get into trios and quads, it just doesn't compete with the MP5 or the MP7, especially when it comes to ammo and damage output. So I think that's some part of why the AMAX is a little bit underrated, because I think it ends up being a really good weapon, especially when you compare it head to head with most of the 5.56 weapons, even though it's not a 5.56 weapon. So that being said, the thing you got to consider is, how are they going to potentially nerf the Grau? From playing Call of Duty for quite a while, there's pretty much a typical pattern that they follow with it when it comes to nerf. So it's kind of like, what can we expect from this particular nerf? It's very rare that they increase recoil. I can't really think of a time where they just significantly increase recoil, which is kind of what the Grau needs, just because it's too accurate at range. You can pretty much beam anyone off of any head glitch, and you're not punished. If someone's using a sniper, you might as well, you shouldn't have picked up a sniper, you should be using a Grau, because even though the damage output at range isn't the greatest, it's just laser accurate, so the practical time to kill is usually incredibly good. The other thing they could do is maybe make it a little bit slower mobility, because it is very competitive when it comes to ADS time. So maybe you punish them harder, so maybe it just doesn't work out as well. But that, even then, I don't think that ends up being the issue. So you kind of come down to a few different things. You could go the recoil, which I think is highly unlikely, but very possible. They just make it harder to hit shots, so they don't increase that practical time to kill, making the weapon a little bit higher of a skill gap. The next thing they could do is they mess with the rate of fire, which they almost never do on weapon balancing. They generally have these different segmented weapon archetypes where they're saying, hey, we're gonna have a weapon with this rate of fire, and that's the role it's gonna play in this particular Call of Duty. So a lot of times you have those same weapons with a little bit slower rate of fire, low recoil, low damage, so they end up being very good. We saw this back in some previous Call of Duties with World War II. We saw the STG, very accurate, decent damage, not overpowered, not strong like the bar. When it came to Black Ops 4, we had the ICR. Overall damage output and time to kill, it wasn't the best, but it was laser accurate, and that's the same issue we're having with the Grau. And pretty much How they affected those weapons a lot of times is they reduced the headshot multiplier. In this game, it's significantly higher than previous Call of Duty. It's almost like you're running high caliber by default, which gives you that extra 50% headshot multiplier, or whatever the case was in previous Call of Duties. So even with the headshot multiplier, I don't think they're really going to go ahead and target that. Maybe they'll make it so it's a little bit less damage. So instead of reducing the shots to kill by like 1, 2, or even 3 shots, they'll just make it so it only reduces it by 1, even at 250 health, even at the furthest ranges. That could be the one, so you just don't feel like you get absolutely melted because the recoil is non-existent and the thing's bullet velocity is just broken, where literally wherever you aim, wherever you shoot, it practically feels like hit scan within 200 meters, which is not necessarily fair because you die faster than you could possibly react. So that's the one route they can do. They can affect the damage multiplier because the weapon as its own does not deal a ton of damage. Then the other thing they can do is nerf the range. And by nerfing the range, what they can do is maybe put the range of the Archangel a lot closer to the Nexus. So even though you're getting a significantly slower aim down sight by picking up the Archangel, you're not getting that significant advantage you get from equipping that Archangel, which increases the range, bullet velocity, recoil control, and you're getting all these bonuses stacks. Basically nerf that attachment entirely so that maybe more people would lean towards the Nexus, which I think if you're using the Nexus is pretty balanced. It has enough recoil where you're not just able to beam people at 500 meters, but it's not so horrible that it would be difficult to win a gunfight at about 80 meters and below. If you want to take it a step further, take the overall Grau and then nerf the overall aim down sight time, which is already fast for the rifle category. So once they've gone and done that, it's not necessarily nerfed in the ground, but it's gonna cause people to maybe second guess some of those choices and allow some of the other weapons to shine, which in my opinion are pretty balanced and pretty usable. Maybe they need to go back through and change some of the weapons. I'll kind of go through some of my top weapons that I think are going to take over the meta. Obviously, I think a lot of people are going to jump back on the M4 bandwagon. I think you're going to notice it has a lot more recoil, a little bit harder to hit shots, but if you're fairly good at the game, it's a very manageable option that I think a lot of players will jump back on, and maybe they'll build it more for range and accuracy, and then maybe stack that with the MP5, so they're going to use the MP5 at close quarters, or maybe the MP7. That's going to be like the new meta right there. The other option is to maybe have the M4, but more in a mobility sense, and combine that with a sniper rifle, so you kind of have the close to medium taken care of with your M4, and maybe it's not going to be as easy to laser people at range, just because you don't have it stacked that way. It's more for mobility, so you don't lose just because your ADS is slow, and then you stack it with a sniper rifle, so you can really take on those people beyond about 65, 70 meters. If people don't end up going that route, I think they could go the M13, and that'll just be the comfortable replacement to the Grau, and it'll just kind of just swap it out the way they're using it now. So you either combine that with an MP5 or an MP7, or if you're playing solos or duos, probably the Fennec Vector. The other one that's just an absolute sleeper, you only see the highest skilled players typically use it just because it does require a little bit more work, but it is an absolute beast if you can land the shots, and that is a combination of the RAM and a sniper rifle. So you take care of that short to medium the same way that you're taking care of with the M4, but at those further ranges, you're also going to be able to take care of the sniper the exact same way that we talked about with that mobile M4. And the two other potential options, I think, is the AMAX can kind of fit in there. I think they could balance that one just a little bit differently, maybe give it a little bit better bullet velocity, because I think that's where it struggles kind of at that medium to long range. It's just a little bit harder to hit the shots, and it's less forgiving because of the rate of fire and because you only get 45 bullets compared to the other weapons I mentioned, where you're going to be able to carry 60 or even 50 with the RAM. And then you would treat that like you're close to medium range. You'd build it a little bit more for mobility, especially within Warzone, and then for the further ranges, you would just combine that with the sniper. So we might be seeing the sniper meta come back. Some people could go back to the MP7 and sniper, but I think that's a little bit more played out now that people have found other weapons that kind of fit those roles just a little bit better and are just a little bit better in the TTK department. And the last one I think a lot of people will jump on is the Kilo, and that is just because it has the lowest magnitude in recoil, so it goes the least up and it goes the least to the side. It just has a little bit of a wonky recoil similar to the RAM. It goes up and to the left, but the recoil magnitude is significantly less. And once you understand the recoil pattern of the Kilo, it's an absolute laser. And I think after the Grau gets nerfed, it's going to be the most accurate rifle in Warzone. It's just going to have a pretty slow TTK beyond 80 meters. But like I said, that could be made up for with extreme accuracy. So I think a lot of people are going to go with the Kilo and then kind of combine that with the MP5 or the MP7, or like I said, in solos or duos, maybe running the Fennec, unless that gets an ammo buff. And that is the overall new meta that I see happening within Warzone. And I think if some weapons receive a buff, they can be added into the mix and be a little bit more dominant and allowed to compete with those weapons. But just by removing the Grau as the superior weapon for Warzone combined with an SMG, I think you're going to get that variety in the weapon meta. Some weapons I'd like to see some kind of buff for so that we can see more of them is the Odin. It needs an ammo buff, maybe match it to the AMAX so it has 45 rounds. I know that'd be a 50% increase on the 30 round mag extension it already has, but I think that's what's necessary for the Odin to kind of step into the mix, especially since it's not a floor loot weapon. It's kind of boring not ever using the Odin in Warzone. The Scar, basically the exact same thing I said with the Odin. It needs that 45 round mag, and that'll allow it to compete. Maybe you can make it a little bit slower with the 45 round mag and unlock some challenges so you unlock it. Same thing like with the Odin. It just is not viable, especially in squads when it takes about 8 to 10 bullets to down somebody, and you're only getting about 25-30 in a magazine. It's just not enough to down 4 players. And then I'd like to see maybe an ADS buff to the AK-47. I think that's the current problem with it, is if you stack it up the right way so that you're able to be laser accurate, you have the extended magazine, you just end up being too slow. It's more like an LMG, and as we know, most players are not using LMGs within Warzone, and that's another thing I'll go ahead and talk about. We can actually get these weapons all buffs. PKM, they need to have some kind of 60 round conversion. I know that it's not viable for that type of weapon in the real world, but they could include like a 60 round belt that had an incredibly fast reload time, so it could still be kind of practical. Even though you wouldn't use a 60 round belt, that would help with the mobility aspect of the weapon. You'd give them the faster reload, so you're not incredibly punished for running LMG, where it's going to take 8 seconds to reload. For some of them, it's actually pretty terrible, and that's a lot of times why people aren't going to use them. It's just too slow, too immobile, and not usable, even though the damage on this thing and the overall recoil is fairly balanced, at least in my opinion. And I'd also like to see that similar thing on the MG34. Maybe have the ammo capacity where you can have a 60 round belt where that is a little bit faster, or maybe a 50 round belt and it reloads a lot faster like your typical rifle, so that could be fit into the meta. And then I think we'd have a lot of variety in the meta, and there'd be tons of options and tons of people experimenting with new things. Maybe buff some of the other SMGs. I think they're not going to do all these things, obviously, but I would love to see a little bit more damage from the PP Bison. Maybe give it a different type of mag, even though it does have kind of a weird magazine. I definitely would like to see that. Maybe improve some of the mobility on the AUG, especially when they use the 60 round 5.56 ammo, so it makes it a little bit more viable, so you don't have to stack it with all these kinds of attachments that make it a little bit slower just to manage that recoil. So this is just some of my thoughts. Obviously, you're never going to have a meta where it's like 10 different weapons. That's just not practical. I think you wouldn't be punished so harshly for just playing with the off meta weapons like we're currently seeing. If you weren't using the snake shots when the snake shots were popular, you're getting absolutely destroyed by them, and you're just kind of mad the whole situation. You couldn't push buildings if you didn't have them yourself, so that was a terrible meta. In the current meta, it's all about the Grau. If you're not using that, there's certain gunfights where you're like, man, I know I would have lasered that dude if I wasn't using XYZ gun, even though I know there's a lot of people that are perfectly fine using the same weapon every game and would love for all these other weapons to get buffed without a nerf. But in the end of the day, it's easier to nerf one weapon, buff some of the others, kind of balance it out, so we get like a 10-15 weapons that are at least viable, even though we'll probably still have a 5-weapon meta. I'd really love to know your guys' thoughts down in the comment section. They're just my overall ideas. I'm not sure exactly what they're going to do in terms of nerfs and buffs, but I'm kind of giving you a heads up of what the overall meta is going to look like. Based on some buffs, maybe some more weapons can be thrown into the mix. If you did enjoy the video or learned something new, please do me a favor hitting that like button. If you're brand new, want to find your way back for more Call of Duty content, make sure you are subscribed with notifications on. Appreciate all the support. Thank you for watching. As always, have a great day.